Hi and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to start on the details for the windows, and the first thing I want to model is the window sills. So let's drag these window sills out of the temp null object, go to the point mode and delete these top points of the window sill, and then let's center the object axis on this object. Go to the model tool and I'm going to change the size to 200 on the x-axis. Hit apply. Go to the edge mode and I'm going to select this front edge here. And since we're going to have stone frames for these windows and a big stone frame for the entire wall, I want to bring this edge forward a bit more than the edges of the window sills on the ground floor. So I'm going to move this one to -24 on the z-axis. Now let's go to the polygon mode, right click and extrude. We need to create caps here, and I'm using an offset of 4 meters. Now let's select this polygon on the left and this one on the right and delete them. Go back to the edge mode and select these two front edges here. Save the selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Now we can start duplicating this windowsill around. So go to Functions, Duplicate, and I'm going to use 6 copies, Enable Movement, and again we need to move each copy by 350 units on the x-axis. Deactivate Rotation, hit Apply. Now let's select these windowsills, right click and connect them. Delete these two objects, select our new object and the selection tags, and instead of just hitting select edges this time, what I want to do is hit restore selection. And this is a safer way of restoring selections, because if we select any of these edges, for example, that we don't need for beveling, and then select our object and the selection tags and hit select edges, it will restore the edge selections that are stored in these tags, but we still have this additional edge here which we don't want. So if I hit restore selection instead, I will restore the selection of one of these tags, and this will automatically deselect everything else, so we don't have this additional edge selected anymore. And now we can hit select edges to restore the selection of all of these tags here, and then set this selection. Okay, now let's delete these tags and duplicate the new object again, and this time we need 3 copies. Deactivate Movement, Enable Rotation, hit Apply, and now let's connect these and delete these objects. Select the new object and the selection tags, restore selection, select edges, and then set this selection. And delete these tags. And I want to duplicate this new object again, and we need 3 copies again, and this time enable movement, and we need to move each copy by 340 units on the y-axis, which is the height of each of these floors here. And instead of overriding this value here with 0, what I'm going to do is simply deactivate the x-axis, because we need these values time and again, and I don't want to enter these every time we need to switch between the x and the y-axis. So make sure that the y-axis here is activated. Deactivate rotation and apply these settings, and this should copy the window sills to the other floors, and they should fit perfectly, which they do. And now let's connect these window sills. Delete these objects. Again, select the new object and the selection tags. Restore selection, select edges, and save the selection. And delete these tags. So I'm going to rename this to window sills. And let's select the window sills and the walls. Hit Alt G and rename this new null object to first to fourth floors. Okay, and next I want to create the stone frames for the first, second and third floors. So we're going to use this object here, drag it out of the temp null object, make our floors invisible. And first of all, let's center the object axis on this object, and then go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges at the front. Right click and extrude them with an offset of 0. And then activate the scale tool and left click and drag in the viewport to scale these apart a bit. And I want these stone frames to have a certain width and height. If you go to the polygon mode and select one of these polygons, I want this polygon to have a height of 15 units, and I want this to have a width of 15 units. And since our window opening is 174 units on the y-axis, we need to scale these edges to 204 on the y-axis. And since this opening is 170 units wide, we need to scale these edges to 200 units on the x-axis. So let's enter 200 under size in the field for the x-axis and change the size on the y-axis to 204. And I'll make the floors invisible again. Go to the polygon mode, and I'm using the loop selection to select these polygons here. Right click and extrude them. Make sure that you deactivate caps this time, and I'm using an offset of 5 meters. And now I'm going to select these two polygons down here and these two up there. Right click and melt them, and then select these two and these two over here. Right click and melt them as well. Go to the point mode and need to get rid of these points here. Okay, let's delete these. And now switch to the edge mode, and I'm using the loop selection to select these edges here. And I'm going to keep this edge selected at the bottom here. If you switch on the floors, we don't actually have to bevel this edge because it's covered by the windowsill. But if we bevel the edges without this edge here at the bottom, we're going to get a messy mesh that is difficult to repair. So I'd rather keep this edge selected and get an additional polygon here, but ensure that we get a clean mesh. I'm not going to select these edges in the corners down here, but I want these two up here. And now let's use the ring selection to select these edges. And now I'm going to save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Okay, and now we can start duplicating this stone frame around. Go to functions, duplicate, and we need 6 copies. Enable movement, activate the x-axis, deactivate the y-axis, and hit apply. Now I'm going to select these stone frames, right click and connect them, delete these ones, select the new object and the selection tags, restore selection, select edges, and then set this selection and delete these tags. And now let's duplicate again. This time we need 3 copies. Deactivate movement, enable rotation, hit apply. And let's connect these 4 objects. Delete these ones. Select this one and the selection tags, restore selection, select edges, and again set the selection and delete these tags. And now let's duplicate once more, and this time we need 2 copies. Enable movement, deactivate the x-axis, activate the y-axis, deactivate rotation, hit apply, and this will copy these stone frames to the 2nd floor and to the 3rd floor. Now let's connect these objects here, delete these ones, select the new one and the selection tags, restore selection, select edges and set the selection. And let's delete these two tags, and I'm going to rename this to stone frames. And now we're going to take a quick break again, and when we come back we're going to make the window frames for the first, second and third floors, and then we'll move on to making the arched stone frame for the fourth floor. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi and welcome back. In this bit we're going to make the window frames for the first, second and third floors. First I'm going to drag these stone frames into the floors null object, and then let's drag our window frames out of this temp null object, and let's go to the point mode. I'm going to select the bottom points of this window frame and move these points up by 4 units on the y-axis, so that they sit on this windowsill. Next let's center the object axis on this window frame, then go to the model tool, and I want to scale this frame to 10 units on the z-axis. If you remember, we moved the frames on the ground floor back towards the inside of the building a bit, and this time I want to move these frames forward a bit because we have these stone frames here, and we're going to have a big stone frame around here later on. So I'm going to bring this frame forward a bit by -3 units on the z-axis. Now let's make these floors invisible. Go to the polygon mode. Next we're going to extrude these polygons. So right click, extrude, and I'm using an offset of 4.5. Right click again, select extrude inner, and I'm using an offset of 2.5 this time. And again extrude, and I'm using an offset of 2.5. Extrude inner with an offset of 1.5, and extrude one more time with an offset of 4 units. And next I'm going to split the selected polygons off by right clicking and selecting split from the context menu, and let's rename this to window panes and drag it into the temp null object. And next I want to reduce the polygon count on this window frame to get rid of the detail on the inside of the building. So let's go to the right view, hit O on the keyboard, switch to the point mode, and I'm going to select this point here as a reference, and this one is positioned at 1 meter on the z-axis. So let's select these points down here and these ones up there, move them to 1 meter on the z-axis, and align them by changing the size to 0 on the z-axis. Next I'm going to deselect everything and optimize this object. Now let's go to the front view, switch the cameras to back, hit O on the keyboard, switch to the polygon mode, and select these polygons, right click and melt them. And now let's select these polygons and melt them as well. Go back to the point mode and select these points here and delete them. And next I'm going to select the edges for beveling. So let's switch to the edge mode, and I'm going to use the loop selection to select these edges. And now let's use the ring selection to select these edges here, and set this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Before I duplicate this frame to the other window openings, let's go to the model tool, activate the move tool, and center the object axis again. And I'm doing this to find out the position of this window frame. And as you can see in the coordinate manager, it's positioned at -1290 on the z-axis. And this is important because later on we have to position the arched window frame on the fourth floor at the same position. And this is because I want to copy the window panes and the window grids all the way up to the fourth floor. And if this frame on the fourth floor is not at the same position as the other frames on the first to third floors, then the window panes and the window grids won't fit up here. Okay, now let's go back to the edge mode and start duplicating this window frame. First of all, we need 6 copies. Enable movement on the x-axis, so let's switch off the y-axis here, and also make sure that enable rotation is deactivated. Then apply these settings, and let's connect these frames. Delete these 2 objects, and now select this new object and the selection tags. Restore selection, select edges, and then set this selection and delete these tags. And now I'm going to duplicate again, and this time we need 3 copies. Deactivate movement and enable rotation. Apply these settings, and again connect these window frames. Delete these objects, select this new object and the tags. Restore selection, select edges, and then set this selection and delete these tags. And now we need to duplicate once more, and this time we need 2 copies. Enable movement on the y-axis, so let's switch off the x-axis here and deactivate rotation. Apply these settings, and this should copy the window frames to the second and third floors. And again connect the window frames. Delete these 2 objects, select this one and the tags. Restore selection, select edges, and save this selection and delete these 2 tags. I'm going to rename this to window frames and drag it into the floor's null object. And that's it for this lesson. In the next bit we're going to make the arched stone frame for the 4th floor. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Okay, so in this bit we're going to make the arched stone frame for the 4th floor. And let's make these floors invisible. And select our stone frame spline. Switch to the back view, change the cameras to front. Hit O on the keyboard. And with this spline still selected, press and hold the Alt key and create an extrude NURBS object. Let's change the movement of this extrude NURBS object to 0, so that we get a flat object. And next I want to change the settings for this spline. And as with the 4th floor walls, I want to change the intermediate points to natural. And this time we need a lot more detail here, so I'm going to bring the number up to 25. Then select the extrude NURBS object, make it editable. Switch to the polygon mode, hit Ctrl A, and reverse the normals. Then go to the point mode, and you can see that we have a lot of points here that we don't need. So all we need to define this straight line here is this point up here, right before the arch starts, and we need this corner point down here, so we can delete everything in between. And don't worry if you don't get all the points right away. We have some points down here that are very close together, and we have to zoom in and delete them later on. And now let's select these points down here and delete them. And now let's select this corner area here, and you can see that I have 4 points left down here. And you can center this selection of points on the screen by hitting S on the keyboard. And I'm going to switch the display to lines and select these 2 points here and delete them. And there's one over here. I'm going to delete this as well. Hit O on the keyboard, and let's check this corner here. And here I have 3 points left, so let's hit S again, and I'm going to delete these 2 points here. Hit O again, and now we should have only 2 points left down here in the corners. And if you use the same settings that I did, you should have a total of 29 points. Let's switch the display back to grow shading lines and go to the edge mode. And I'm using the loop selection tool to select these edges, then right click and extrude them. And we need to extrude these with an offset of 15. Okay, because I want these polygons here to have the same height or width as the frames on the other 3 floors. So this one here is 15 units on the x-axis, and this is 15 units on the y-axis. And now let's select this center polygon, delete it, and I'm going to make a copy of this new object, and I'm going to rename this to big stone frame. And we can get rid of these polygon selection tags. Let's put our big stone frame into the temp null object. I'm going to rename this one to stone frame. Now right click and extrude, and I want to extrude this with an offset of 5 units. And this is again the same offset that we used to extrude the stone frames on the other 3 floors. Now switch to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges here. We need to move these back by 30 units. So I'm going to enter plus 30 down here. And this will align these edges with the inside of our wall. Okay, next let's select the edges for beveling. I'm going to use the loop selection to select these edges here. And as with the stone frames on the other 3 floors, I'm going to keep this edge here selected. We don't need these edges here in the corners, but I do want this one over here and this one here. Now let's save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. Go to the polygon mode and use the loop selection to select these polygons. Right click, split them off, and this is going to be our window frame. And you can delete the selection tag on this window frame. Let's drag this into the temp null object. Select the stone frame again, go to the edge mode, and now we can start duplicating the stone frame. So go to functions, duplicate, and we need 6 copies. Enable movement on the x-axis, switch off the y-axis, and make sure that enable rotation is deactivated. Then apply these settings, and now I'm going to connect these stone frames. Delete these 2 objects and select our new object, and the selection tags. Restore the selection, select edges and set the selection, and delete these tags. And now we need to duplicate once more, and this time we need 3 copies. Deactivate movement and enable rotation. Apply these settings, and again connect the stone frames. Delete these 2 objects, select this one and the tags. Restore selection, select edges, set the selection, and delete these tags. And now I'm going to drag our stone frames out of this floors null object. Select the 2 stone frame objects, right click and connect them. Delete these 2, select our new object and the tags, and again restore selection, select edges, and save the selection and delete this tag here. Now let's rename this one to stone frames and drag it into the floors null object. Okay, and let's apply this white material to the stone frames. Let's make this floors object visible for the renderer and do a quick test render. And this is how this part of the building looks. In the next bit we're going to make the window frames for the 4th floor. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi and welcome back. In this bit we're going to make the window frames for the 4th floor. And first of all I want to make these floors here invisible. And now let's drag our window frame out of the temp null object. Go to the point mode and select these bottom points. And I'm going to move these up by 4 units on the y-axis to position them on the windowsill. And now let's center the object axis on this object activate the move tool, and I'm going to scale this frame to 10 units on the z-axis. And this time I'm not going to bother moving it around. We're going to finish this frame and then position it on the z-axis where the frames on the other floors are positioned. So we can go straight to the polygon mode, right click and extrude, and I'm going to use the same settings here that I used for the other frames. So first of all, we're going to extrude this one by 4.5 meters. And now let's extrude inner with an offset of 2.5. Then extrude again with an offset of 2.5. Extrude inner with an offset of 1.5. And extrude again with an offset of 4 units. And next I want to reduce the amount of detail on this frame so that we get less detail on the inside of the building. Let's go to the right view, hit O on the keyboard, switch to the point mode, and I'm going to select this point down here as a reference. And again, this one should be positioned at 1 meter on the z-axis. So I'm going to select these points. And up here, I'm going to select all of these points. Now let's move these to 1 meter on the z-axis and align them by changing the size on the z-axis to 0. And now I'm going to deselect all and optimize this object. Go to the front view, switch the cameras to back, hit O on the keyboard, switch to the polygon mode, and now I'm going to select these polygons here. Right click and melt them. Now let's select these polygons, melt them as well. And now I'm going to select all of these polygons here. And again, right click and melt these. Now let's go to the point mode, and I'm going to increase the radius for the live selection tool to about 12. And now we can select these points here and delete them, and also select these ones down here and delete them. Okay, and now we have this simple surface on the back and our detailed surface at the front. Next, let's go to the edge mode, and I'm going to deselect all and then use the loop selection to select these edges here. And then use the live selection tool to select these 3 edges. Maybe let's undo this and reduce the radius of the live selection tool again to about 2. Now select these edges here. And these ones over here. Go to selection, set selection, and rename it to edges for beveling. And now let's go to the model tool and center the object axis on this frame. And now I'm going to move this to minus 1290 on the z-axis, so it's positioned exactly where the other frames down here are positioned on the z-axis. Okay, and now we can go back to the edge mode and start duplicating. Let's make these floors visible. And again, we need 6 copies. Enable movement on the x-axis and deactivate rotation. Apply these settings and connect these frames. delete these objects and select this one and the tags, restore selection, select edges and set the selection, delete these tags and duplicate again. We need 3 copies this time, and we need to deactivate movement and enable rotation. Apply these settings and again connect these window frames. Delete these 2 objects and select this one and the tags, restore selection, select edges and set this selection and delete these tags. And now I'm going to drag the window frames out of the floors null object. Select these 2 window frames, connect them, delete these 2, select this one and the tags, restore selection, select edges and then set this selection and delete this tag. And now I'm going to rename this to window frames, put it back in the floors null object. Okay, let's make this visible for the renderer and do a quick test render. And that's it for this bit. In the next lesson we're going to come back and make the window panes for these 4 floors. So thanks for watching and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Okay, so in this bit we're going to do the window panes. First I want to make this floors object invisible. Now let's drag our window panes out of the temp null object, hit O on the keyboard, and I want to close the polygon hole at the back. Then use the loop selection to select these edges at the front and delete them. And let's center the object axis on this object. And I'm going to make a copy of this one and rename this to window grid. Let's drag this into the temp null object. And this is all we have to do for the window pane here. So now we can start duplicating this object around. Let's go to functions, duplicate, and we need 6 copies. Enable movement on the x-axis, so switch off the y-axis here. Apply these settings and let's connect these window panes. Delete these objects. Select our new object and duplicate again. And this time we need 3 copies. Deactivate movement, enable rotation, and apply these settings. And again, let's connect these window panes. And delete these objects here. Select our new object and duplicate once more. And again, we need 3 copies. And this time we need to enable movement on the y-axis, so I'm going to switch off the x-axis here, and I'm also going to deactivate rotation. Apply these settings, and this should copy the window panes to the other 3 floors. And again, I'm going to connect these window panes and delete these objects. Let's rename this one to window panes and drag this dark material onto this object. And I'm going to switch to the polygon mode. Select one of these polygons here, hit S on the keyboard. Let's rotate around it. And you can see it fits perfectly onto this window frame. It's aligned with the window frame at the back here, and the edges at the top fit perfectly as well. And if they don't fit perfectly, and if you have a gap here between this window pane and the frame, simply select these top edges of all of the window panes on the 4th floor and move them up a bit if you have to. And don't forget to switch off snapping when you do that. Okay, so this is what we have so far, and let's do a quick test render. In the next bit we're going to make the window grid for these 4 floors. So thanks for watching and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi, in this bit we're going to make the window grid for these 4 floors. First of all, let's switch off these floors here and drag our window grid out of this temp null object. Let's go to the front view, hit O on the keyboard, and I'm going to switch the display to Guru shading lines. Go to the edge mode, and I'm going to select these two edges here, right click and apply an edge cut. And we need to set the offset to 50% here. We need one subdivision, and let's deactivate create n-gons and apply these settings. Now I'm going to select this edge here and move it up to 45 on the y-axis. Then select these edges here, right click and apply another edge cut. And this time we need two subdivisions. And now let's select these new edges here and change their size to 90 units on the x-axis. And now I'm going to select all of these new edges here, right click and bevel these with an inner offset of 3 units. And of course we need to change the type to linear and bring the subdivisions down to 0. Now let's go to the polygon mode and select these polygons here and delete them. Go to the point mode, and since none of these points are selected, we can go straight to functions, optimize, hit OK. Now let's go back to the polygon mode. Right click and extrude these polygons with an offset of 2 units. This will make them flush with the window frames. And next I'm going to delete these polygons here, and this one and this one. And down here I'm going to delete these 2 polygons. Now let's go back to the edge mode. Switch to the front view, and I'm using the loop selection with stop at boundary edges selected to select these edges here. And I also want these edges for beveling. And we also need these edges here and these ones over here. If you switch back to the perspective view, we should have these edges here in the corners selected as well now. Okay, and now let's save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. And now we can start duplicating. First of all, we need 6 copies. Enable movement on the x-axis, switch off the y-axis, and apply these settings. And now let's connect these window grids. Delete these 2. Select this new object and select these tags. Restore selection, select edges, and set the selection and delete these tags. Now we're going to duplicate again. We need 3 copies this time, and deactivate movement, enable rotation, and apply these settings. And again, let's connect these window grids. Delete these objects, select this one and the tags. Restore selection, select edges, and again set the selection and delete these tags. And now we need to duplicate this object once more. Again, we need 3 copies. Enable movement on the y-axis, so I'm going to switch off the x-axis this time. And also let's deactivate rotation and apply these settings. And this will copy the window grid to the other 3 floors. And now let's connect these window grids again. Delete these objects, select our new object and the tags, and again restore selection, select edges, and set this selection and delete these tags. I'm going to rename this to window grid and put it in the floor's null object. Let's make this visible for the renderer. And if we go to the polygon mode and select these polygons here, well, maybe not that many, just these ones over here. Hit S on the keyboard. Now this window grid should be perfectly positioned on the 4th floor as well. Okay, let's do a quick render. So basically this looks alright, but we have to change some things on the 4th floor here. For one thing, we need to move these polygons down a bit. Okay, they don't look very good as high up there on the window as they are now, so I want to move these down. And there's also another problem that we have to fix, but we're going to do that in the next lesson. So thanks for watching this, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to modify the window grid on the 4th floor a bit, and like I said, I want to move these polygons here down a bit, but we also have another problem here. And if you drag this dark material onto the window grid, let's get in a little closer and do a test render, you can see that we have overlapping here. And this is also one of the reasons why I like to use these dummy materials and use different colors for these objects. You can find out these trouble spots more easily sometimes if you have different colors on these objects. We didn't do anything wrong when creating these objects, and because this window frame has a thickness of 2 units up here, and our window grid has a thickness of 2 units as well. But as you can see, this leads to overlapping, and if you use different materials for your final render, you're going to have trouble up here. So we need to fix that as well. And I'm not going to fix this for each of these window grids separately. What we're going to do is make a copy of this window grid, drag it out of here, make it invisible. Now let's go to the front view, select our original window grid, hit O on the keyboard, and let's go to the point mode, and I'm going to select the window grids on the 4th floor and delete them. Okay. And next I'm going to make this floor's object invisible, make our new window grid visible, switch to the front view and select these points here of the first window on the left, and then go to selection, invert, and delete these. Go back to the perspective view and select this window grid at the back and delete it as well. And now we're going to center the object axis on the remaining window grid. Okay. Now first of all I want to move these points down a bit, so let's make the floors visible again. And let's make sure that snapping is deactivated here. And I want to bring these points down a bit, maybe to about here. Okay. And next we have to move some of the points on this window grid to align them with the window frame. And if you select these points here, you can see that these are positioned at -74 on the x-axis. And if you select these ones over there, you can see that their position is 74 on the x-axis. And this means that we only need to reposition these points on the left half of this window grid, and once they're in position we can copy their position to these points over here. Okay, so let's make this floors object visible again and select these points. I'm going to switch the display to lines now, and I want to move these points over to the right a bit until this bottom point overlaps with the edge on the window frame. And now let's select these points, align them with the window frame as well. And up here we're going to do the same thing, move these down a bit. And now I'm going to select these points, move them down a bit more. Okay, let's get rid of this dark material on the window grid. And I also want to delete this dark material on the window grid on the other 3 floors. Now let's do a quick test render. And if you get a little closer, you can see that we still have a gap in here. So let's select these points here and get really close. And you can see that we need to move these up a bit. Bring them in line with the edge of the window frame. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Select these points. We need to bring these down a bit more. Like so. Okay, and over here, select these points. And if you get closer, you can see that we need to move these a bit further to the right, like so. And I need to move these points here back a bit to the left. Okay. Now let's do another render. And this looks fine. And if you want, you can apply this dark material to the window grid again, do another render. And by doing this, we can find out if we have, if the window grid still overlaps. But this looks pretty much perfect, I would say. So we can leave it like that. And now what I'm going to do is select these points, copy the X position, and then select these points over here, paste the X position, and just make sure that it's positive. Same here, select these points, copy the X position, select these points and paste it, and again make sure that this position is positive. And up here I'm going to select these points, copy the Y position, then select these points, paste the Y position. Now select these, again copy the Y position and paste it over to these points. Okay, and now let's go to the edge mode, and we can start duplicating this window grid. So let's make 6 copies, enable movement on the X-axis, switch off the Y-axis, apply these settings, and well, let's delete these dark materials here. Okay, and now let's connect these window grids. Delete these 2 objects, and select this one, select the tags, restore selection, select edges, set the selection and delete these tags. And let's duplicate again. We need 3 copies. Deactivate movement and enable rotation and apply these settings. And again, let's connect these window grids. Delete these ones. And now I'm going to drag the original window grid out of this floor's null object. Select both of these grids and connect these. Delete these 2, select this one and the tags, restore selection, select edges, and again set this selection and delete these tags. And this is our final window grid for these 4 floors. Let's put this into the floor's null object. Okay, and let's do a quick render. In the next bit we're going to make the big stone frame. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.